The evening had settled quietly over the house, with only the soft ticking of the clock breaking the silence. Johnson sat on the sofa, his gaze fixed on his wife, Margarita, who was distracted by her phone. She was a striking woman, with porcelain skin and flowing dark hair, an image of elegance, yet tonight there was an air about her that felt different, subtle but undeniably there. Margarita had always been the center of attention wherever she went, with her sharp blue eyes and alluring beauty. But tonight, as she sat there, lost in her screen, Johnson couldn't help but feel the distance between them. He had been sensing it for days now, a quiet shift in their relationship. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but something was amiss. His eyes followed her every move, trying to catch some clue, some indication of what was on her mind. The silence hung between them like an unspoken question, neither daring to disturb it. Margarita, finally lowering her phone, met his gaze with an unreadable expression. "Johnson," she began, her voice softer than usual, "there's something we need to talk about." A shiver ran through him. He had heard those words before, but never in a context like this. It was the calm before a storm, the kind of conversation you know would change everything, even if you didn't know why. Johnson cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "What's on your mind?" he asked, though his words felt somehow distant from the tension in the room. "I've been thinking," Margarita continued, her voice faltering slightly as though testing the waters, "what if we tried an open relationship?" Johnson froze. His heart skipped a beat. "An open relationship," he repeated, confusion and disbelief flooding his thoughts. He tried to mask the shock, but it was clear in his voice. He was certain he had misheard her. Margarita nodded, her eyes focused on him, searching his face for a sign of understanding. "Yes, a way for us to be free, to explore without the boundaries we've created. I don't want us to feel confined. It could work, don't you think?" The room seemed to close in around him. Johnson's mind raced. An open relationship? The very thought felt alien to him. A part of him wanted to dismiss the idea entirely, but another part, one he couldn't quite explain, compelled him to listen. What had changed in Margarita? What was this desire for freedom all about? Margarita watched him closely, waiting for his response, her gaze unwavering. He couldn't bring himself to speak right away. His thoughts tangled in a web of confusion, disbelief, and something deeper, fear. He had never expected this conversation, nor did he want it. The silence in the room was palpable, thick with the weight of her words. Johnson looked at Margarita, trying to understand her, trying to understand the woman he had shared his life with. His mind struggled to process the idea she had just put forward. Was this a passing whim? A momentary lapse in judgment? Or was it something deeper, something more permanent? "Are you sure this is what you want?" Johnson finally asked, his voice quiet, yet filled with concern. "This idea. An open relationship. What do you mean by it?" Margarita leaned forward, her expression serious yet calm, as if she had anticipated his questions. "I just think we're at a crossroads, Johnson. We've been together for so long, and lately, I've felt stifled, like we're trapped in a routine. This could be a way for us to break free, to find new experiences without losing each other in the process." Her words hung in the air, tempting him with their promise of freedom, but also filling him with a sense of dread. A part of him wanted to argue, to tell her it was absurd. Yet another part, the part that feared losing her, held back. He had always prided himself on being a man who adapted, who compromised for the sake of harmony. But this was different. For a long moment, Johnson stayed silent, processing the enormity of what she had proposed. "I never thought I'd hear this from you," he said finally, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I thought we were happy. Why would you want to risk everything we have for something like this?" Margarita looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "Because sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating. I want us to grow, to be better versions of ourselves, even if that means taking a step back from what we know." She paused, as if unsure whether to say more. "I love you, Johnson, but I need more than what we have right now. I need to feel alive again." The words hit him harder than he expected. Alive again? He had always thought they were fine, that their marriage was stable, even thriving. But now, he wasn't so sure. As the days passed after their conversation, Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted. Margarita seemed distant, distracted, often lost in her own thoughts. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself that she was simply adjusting to the idea she had proposed. Yet, in his heart, he knew there was more to it. And then one afternoon, Johnson walked into the living room to find Margarita in conversation with someone, a man, someone he had never met before. The man was tall, with an air of confidence that immediately put Johnson on edge. He wore an expensive suit, and there was something undeniably magnetic about him. His presence seemed to command attention, not just from Margarita, but from the entire room. The man smiled warmly as he shook Johnson's hand, his grip firm but not overly assertive. "You must be Johnson," he said smoothly, his voice deep and reassuring. "I'm Harrison. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Johnson smiled politely, but his mind raced. Harrison? Who was this man? Why did Margarita seem so comfortable around him? "We've been working together on a project," Margarita explained, her voice casual, but there was a hint of something unspoken in her words. "I see," Johnson replied, his voice tight. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This man, this Harrison, seemed to have a hold on Margarita that he couldn't quite understand. As the days wore on, Johnson's unease deepened. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Margarita was hiding something from him. He'd seen the way she looked at Harrison when they spoke. There was a spark, a connection that felt out of place. He tried to confront her about it, but Margarita always had an excuse, a reason why things weren't as they seemed. "You're just being paranoid," she would say. "Harrison's just a colleague. There's nothing going on." But deep down, Johnson knew. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. It wasn't until one fateful evening, when Johnson happened to glance at Margarita's phone while she was in the kitchen, that the truth began to reveal itself. A text message from Harrison flashed on the screen. "I can't stop thinking about you. Let's make this happen soon." Johnson's heart skipped a beat. The words were like a knife to his chest. He had known, deep down, that something was off, but this confirmation was worse than anything he could have imagined. His hands trembled as he put the phone down, his mind racing. How could she do this to him? After everything they had shared, how could she betray him like this? When Margarita returned to the living room, she found Johnson standing there, his face pale, his eyes filled with shock and hurt. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice suddenly filled with concern. Johnson didn't say anything at first. Instead, he held up the phone, the text message still open on the screen. "What's this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margarita froze, her face paling. For a long moment, there was silence, the weight of the truth sinking in. She couldn't deny it any longer. I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Johnson. I never wanted to hurt you. But I've been feeling lost, and Harrison, he made me feel alive again." Johnson's heart broke as the words left her lips. The betrayal stung in a way he hadn't thought possible. He had given everything to this marriage, and now, everything was falling apart. "Why, Margarita?" he asked, his voice filled with pain. "Why couldn't you come to me? Why did you go behind my back?" The days following Margarita's confession were filled with tension and uncertainty. Johnson could not escape the pain that gnawed at him, nor could he stop the swirl of emotions that flooded his chest each time he thought of her betrayal. How could someone he loved and trusted for so long have lied to him, gone behind his back? How could she claim she was searching for something she couldn't find in their relationship, when he had always been there? Margarita, on the other hand, felt the weight of her actions press down on her. Her confession had been only the beginning of the destruction of the life they had built together. She had wanted freedom, but now she realized that the cost of that freedom had been far too high. She had lost Johnson, perhaps irreparably. And Harrison, the man who had made her feel alive again, had become a symbol of everything she had ruined. The days were heavy, as both of them navigated the aftermath of their decisions. Johnson tried to distract himself with work, but every moment, every idle thought, brought him back to that painful text message, to the broken trust, to the love he had once shared with Margarita. "I can't believe you would do this to me," Johnson had said that evening, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "How did we get here, Mar? How could we go from what we had to this?" Margarita had tried to apologize, to explain herself, but the words felt hollow. She had no excuse, no justification for her actions. She had acted out of weakness, fear and desire, but she knew it was no excuse for the hurt she had caused. Despite her regret, despite her apologies, The damage had been done. Johnson and Margarita found themselves at a crossroads, one they had never expected to reach. The foundation of their relationship had crumbled beneath the weight of lies, deceit, and betrayal. For weeks, they struggled with whether they could rebuild what had been broken. But every time they spoke, it seemed as if the chasm between them grew wider. Trust had been shattered beyond repair, and no amount of pleading or explaining could bring it back. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mar," Johnson admitted one night, as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "I don't know how we can fix this. I want to believe you, I really do, but I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Margarita's heart broke as she listened to his words. She had never wanted to destroy him, never wanted to cause him this much pain. But now, she realized that the only thing left between them was the wreckage of their once beautiful marriage. "I don't know what to do either," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've lost you, Johnson. I've lost us." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the truth hanging in the air. There was no more pretending, no more false hope. The love they had once shared seemed like a distant memory, slipping through their fingers like sand. Finally, after many long heart-wrenching conversations, Johnson made a decision. He could not stay in a marriage that had been broken beyond repair. It was with a heavy heart that he told Margarita he was leaving. He needed time away from her, time to heal, to think, and to regain the trust that had been so cruelly taken from him. "I can't keep living like this," Johnson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to go. I need to find peace, and I can't do that if I stay here." Margarita nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said softly. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to lose you." Johnson gathered his things in silence, his mind in a fog of disbelief. He had never thought it would come to this. He had never thought that Margarita would betray him, or that their love would end this way. As he walked out of the door, leaving behind the life they had built, it felt as though a part of him had died with it. In the weeks that followed, Johnson withdrew from the world. He moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, far from the home he had shared with Margarita. He buried himself in work, trying to distract himself from the pain that seemed to follow him everywhere. There were moments when he felt the emptiness of her absence, when he longed for the days when things had been simpler, when their love had been enough to keep them together. But slowly, gradually, he began to heal. He took long walks in the park, read books he had never had time for before, and spent time with old friends he had neglected during his marriage. With each passing day, the pain grew a little less sharp, the hurt a little easier to bear. He began to realize that he was not the man he used to be. He had grown stronger, more resilient, even in the face of heartbreak. Margarita, too, struggled to move on. She had made a terrible mistake, and she knew it. Harrison had been a fleeting escape, a momentary distraction from the emptiness she had felt in her marriage. But now, in the silence of her own apartment, she realized that what she had lost could never be replaced. She had lost Johnson, the man she had once loved with all her heart. Months passed, and as fate would have it, Johnson and Margarita's paths crossed again. It was at a local cafe, a place they had once frequented together. Margarita had been sitting at a corner table, lost in thought, when she saw him walk in. Johnson hadn't seen her at first, but when their eyes met, everything stopped. There was no anger, no bitterness in her gaze, only a quiet, sorrowful understanding. It was as if they both realized in that moment that they had changed, that their love was a thing of the past. Margarita stood up and walked toward him, her heart racing. "Johnson," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He met her gaze and nodded, his expression unreadable. "Hi, Margarita." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the years of pain and hurt hanging between them. But something had shifted in both of them. The anger had faded, and all that was left was the understanding that they had both grown, both changed. The past was the past, and they could never go back to what they once were. "I don't know what to say," Margarita began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for everything. For all the hurt I caused you." Johnson looked at her, his expression softening. "I know, March. I know." Their conversation was quiet, filled with the weight of all that had passed between them. But in the end, it was not about the pain. It was not about the betrayal or the broken trust. It was about accepting the truth, accepting that they were no longer the people they had once been. They said goodbye, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance of the fact that their paths had diverged. They had loved each other, but love was not enough to hold them together anymore. It was time to move on, to let go of the past and embrace the future. Johnson left the cafe with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but it was his road to walk now. And Margarita, standing there in the cafe, realized that she had taken the first step toward healing. They had both paid the price for their mistakes, but now, they could finally begin to forgive themselves. As time passed, Johnson and Margarita went their separate ways, no longer defined by the pain of the past. Johnson continued to rebuild his life, finding a new sense of purpose and happiness. Margarita, too, found herself again, learning to love herself and accepting the consequences of her choices. Though they never spoke again, they both carried the lessons they had learned from each other. They understood now that love, trust, and forgiveness were not given lightly. They had each found their own path, and though it was different from what they had imagined, it was theirs to walk. And with that, their story ended, not in bitterness or regret, but in the quiet acceptance that life, in all its complexity, goes on.